Welcome to Breaking Down Bergman. I'm David Friend.
I'm Sonia Strimban.
And today we're looking at The Seventh Seal in a three-part series.
Vem är du?
Jag är döden.
Kommer du för att hämta mig?
Jag har redan länge gått vid din sida.
Det vet jag.
Är du beredd?
Min kropp är rädd. Inte jag själv. Vänta ett ögonblick.
Så säger ni alla. Men jag lämnar inga uppskov.
Du spelar ju schack, inte sant?
Hur vet du det?
Ja. Jag har sett det på målningar och hört i visorna.
Ja, jag är verkligen en ganska skicklig schackspelare.
Du kan ändå inte vara skickligare än jag.
Varför vill du spela schack med mig?
Det är min sak.
Det har du rätt i.
Villkoret är att jag får leva så länge jag står dig emot. Spelar jag dig matt, friar du mig. Du fick svart.
Det passar ju bäst så. Inte sant?
The Seventh Seal, possibly Bergman's biggest film at this point. And we debated how we were going to handle this because there's really so much to talk about. And I think that's going to be the case for a lot of movies, but here with The Seventh Seal, we just have to cover all the bases.
Mm-hmm. And it was also a little bit intimidating, I think, approaching this project, just because so many people have talked about it and written on it, and it's kind of complex to attack it.
So what we've decided to do is break this down into three parts. So there'll be three separate videos covering different areas of the film. Today we're going to be talking about origins of the film, where it came from, some of the context and key meanings. And then in the second part, we're going to be looking at meaning and symbols, the symbolism, the characters, key scenes. And then in the third part, we're going to look at the legend of the Seventh Seal and what it means to cinema and some of our more personal responses to the film. This is a project that really was a passion project in a way that none of Bergman's previous projects really were. I mean, we've talked about how things have been personal to him, but I think you really have to understand how much Bergman was involved with this story. It originally started as a play called Wood Painting, and that was around 1953-1954. And Bergman sort of progressed with that same tale. He did a radio play version, as well as directed it for the stage. And then he was laid up in the bed in a hospital. We've sort of talked about this before.
Running theme.
Yeah, Smiles of a Summer's Night was sort of done the same way. He was very ill. He didn't really know what was wrong with him at the time. Anyway, he's in the hospital, very sick, and so he starts working on the Seventh Seal screenplay. And a lot of those themes of death and questioning religion have all sort of culminated in this one production that we see when Bergman is released from the hospital later on and turns this into a film.
Well, despite that bleak background, the film was actually quite an award-winning film.
Yeah, in 1957, it won a special jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival, and it sort of set the scene for Bergman's career. It established him as a filmmaker in the foreign film scene and sort of brought the foreign film scene into the mainstream in the United States. And it's really hard to just explain how significant this film is to cinema. I mean, everybody's heard of it by now. It's a little bit cliche to talk about The Seventh Seal as this ultimate film, but it really was a major turning point for both him and for cinema. And so talking about that prize at the Cannes Film Festival, I think it really was deserving of the recognition, separate from the fact that it's such a legend now, just because of how great it is and the people involved, particularly the cast.
Yeah, we see a lot of new faces in this film. Max von Sydow, for one, who plays the main character of the Knight. And
he went on to become one of Bergman's most used actors. He's been in plenty of his films since this film.
To be honest, I mean, we've gotten a little bit attached to some of Bergman's previous actors.
Yeah.
And in a way, I would love to see them resurrected again, but I honestly don't think that any of his previous talent could have played this film.
A lot of the weightiness of this film, of course, comes from the religious symbolism that's throughout it. And we'll get to that in some of the later videos as well, but just on the most basic sense, there's a lot of influences from the Book of Revelation in The Seventh Seal. In fact, the movie opens with a quote from the Book of Revelation, and it closes with one as well. And the title, The Seventh Seal, is from that quote.
But these are themes that we've seen kind of interwoven throughout different Bergman films. The theme of religion and morality, kind of the dogmatic approach to trying to live your life in accordance with a set of rules, death and what happens after death. Like, is it nothingness when you die, or is it according to the Christian faith? Are you going to be rewarded, go to heaven, punished, go to hell? So I think he's exploring a lot of those themes again because he himself hasn't come to terms and hasn't found an answer for himself. And as we've seen from Bergman many times, he works these things out through his films. And here it's just a lot more blatant. He's really, putting our feet to the fire, so to speak, and saying, I want you to think about this.
And what I think is really great about this film is that it is all of those questions that Bergman's been debating in previous films, but this film doesn't feel so self-indulgent. Because it's about religion, I think in particular, it sort of takes on this greater meaning that is beyond the filmmaker himself.
Yes, but also because I think of the way that he's representing it, right? So it's not just common day-to-day people. First of all, I think we should definitely acknowledge the fact that, like Smiles of a Summer Night, it's set in an alternate setting. Mm-hmm. It's set in the Middle Ages, and we're dealing with metaphysical, philosophical, theological characterizations that are appearing in the film as personas. Mm-hmm. So we have death personified as a character, and that is something that Bergman has never done before.
Well, it's not entirely true. There was that brief moment in prison where we actually got a very short glimpse of death in the film within a film.
Right. I stand corrected.
So Sonia, what happens in this movie exactly? How does it differ from other Bergman films?
It happens during the Dark Ages in the time of the Crusades. So the main character is a knight, and he goes to fight the Holy War. Now, the knight is a very idealistic man, and he wholeheartedly believes in his faith, the Christian faith, and his God, and he buys into that 100%. However, when he goes to fight this holy war, he realizes that the actions that he's committing are completely against the beliefs that he holds most true. So he's very torn when he returns after 10 years of slaughter to be confronted by this new reality and not understanding his purpose in the world and why he's done what he's done and how it relates to basically how he's going to live his life going forward. So that puts him in a place of questioning everything he believes and knows to be true.
And really, what Bergman has said in several interviews is this is one side of his view
on life.
Right, and he sort of lays that out through the characters.
Yeah. I think what's interesting in the film, we have a whole host of characters that are all interacting within very close quarters with each other because they basically go on a journey. And with each set of characters, Bergman is representing an alternate way of living life and looking at the world. And it's kind of like a spectrum. So on one end of the spectrum, we have the knight, Antonius Bloch, who represents the most idealistic and wholesome moral values type of perspective on life, and self-righteousness and all that kind of stuff. And then I think on the other hand, completely on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have, and as we've seen frequently in Bergman's films, a cast of actors, right? And they're performers, and they're kind of bohemian, and they don't really overthink life, and they just live it by day, and they're just kind of simple. And then in between that, we have a lot of other characters, but the only one that I will mention is probably the knight's squire, Jans, who is, he's kind of in between the two. So he's not a simple character, but he's not as intellectual and sophisticated as the knight is.
And he's not as burdened.
No, he's not. Well, he is. It's interesting. He's definitely also going through some kind of conflict internally, but he's got a very sarcastic, down-to-earth, kind of ironic perspective on things. So I think that what Bergman is trying to show us is basically through that spectrum, we're seeing his own exploration of how to approach life and how to determine what his purpose is, both, I think, as a human being and as an artist. Now,
Bergman in interviews has said that there's really only the two drastic viewpoints, the night being the one polar opposite in that case. And he's never really said this theory that you have where it's, there's this broad spectrum of different views. But I mean, it makes sense. And I think maybe even if that's not factually the case, Bergman has spent so much time with this script, with this play, with the radio production, as we talked about, that he might have even worked this in, not fully being conscious of exactly how all of his characters represented his dilemma.
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible, because he's so detail-oriented. In Bergman films, it's all these small things that are either mundane or seem coincidental, but actually have significant meaning. So for me, what's really interesting is the way that the characters are coupled. So for example, you have the knight, who's kind of the leader in the relationship between him and the squire. The two of them are traveling together. In that pairing, the knight is the visionary. He has the ability to see things on Earth that no one else can see. For example, death, right? And he's battling with that complexity of those two worlds colliding. The other couple, which is at the other end of the spectrum, is Yoff and Mia. And they're kind of, and I think we've heard this from some commentary on the film, they're kind of the representatives of the Adam and Eve couple, or the Mary and Joseph couple, and they have this angelic, cherub-looking baby boy who's kind of like the Christ child, right? So they're the simple, wholesome couple. And within that pairing, there's also Yoff, who, as simple as he is, for some reason, Bergman gives him the ability to have visions of other worldly things. So he sees angels, or a representation of Jesus' mother Mary walking the ground with a little toddler. And Mia does not. And they have a very similar dynamic between Yoff and Mia and the knight and the squire, who are trying to understand each other but can't really. So I think those two parallels are there for a reason.
That's an interesting point, and I'm curious what our viewers actually think about this. And what we're going to do in the next episode is sort of talk about how these characters collide in a critical scene of the film, and that will lead us into part 2 of our 3-part series on the Seventh Seal, where we're looking at the meanings and symbols of the film, delving into some of the characters as well. So be sure to leave your comments on the video with your initial impressions on the Seventh Seal. Is it your favorite Bergman movie? And be sure to like us on our Facebook page, and join us next time when we discuss even more detail on the Seventh Seal.